Hi, my name's Phillip Mottaz, and my favorite thing is the Ramones. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and I'm recording this on Friday, May 5th, ahead of a May 7th release, because I have a lot going on this weekend, and if I don't say hello to you now, I won't get to say hello at all. And I am trying to get back in my good podcasting production habits of including an introduction, to, keep up with time and place and ahead of the interviews. I'm really excited as we head into the spring. I have a lot of interviews scheduled. I've mentioned it, I think last week, I did a call for recommendations on Twitter and Instagram and met so many new people. Today's interview is one of those people, Phillip Mottaz. He was a Chicago comic, but not someone I knew in Chicago. But we know filmmaker and comedian Taya Lux in common. And so she recommended that Phillip come on the podcast. And I'm talking to lots of new people. I have been listening to Abraham Josie Reisman's new book called Ringmaster, Vince McMahon and the Unmaking of America. I started listening to that a few nights ago to get ready to talk to Josie. And just keeping very busy. Tonight is, I was at home every night this week, gathering my strength to go to like 15 different social engagements this weekend, which include a last minute invitation to Into the Woods. And I am so excited to see Into the Woods performed. I've never seen it live. In a couple weeks on Friday, June 9th, Jackie Cation is coming to Chicago. So I'm going to be asking all my friends in Chicago to buy tickets to see Jackie Cation at the Lincoln Lodge. I already bought 4 because I'm convinced I can find at least 3 people to go with me. And Jackie agreed to come on the podcast, even though I sometimes feel like it's just a ripoff of the Dork Forest. But the concept of talking to people about something they love is a great way to have a podcast running. And Jackie has done the Dork Forest for 17 years. And it's a lot of fun. And she's a stand-up comic who I adore. And she's finally back in Chicago. And so we're all going to see Jackie on June 9th. That's the plan at the Lincoln Lodge. I'm going to include a clip from the Upper Middle Brow podcast. Upper Middle Brow, I had both hosts, Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes, on Finding Favorites, and they included a couple weeks ago a really nice shout out to Finding Favorites, which kind of helped me find my mojo to start my 4th year of podcasting, which is pretty wild that this COVID experiment of Finding Favorites is heading into year 4. But I think I started in recording in May of 2020, went live in June of 2020. And so 21, 22, 23, that's 3 years. So this is kicking off year 4. So I'm going to include that nice little shout out from Chris and Jesse. And then we're going to get into a very fun conversation with Phillip Mottaz, who is from a small town in Illinois. And we have a great time talking about the Ramones. And the Ramones are not the Replacements. When I ask him, are the Ramones from Minnesota? And he is confused because what could I possibly be talking about? I was talking about the Replacements. So if you want a good giggle, listen to this interview knowing that every time he talked about the Ramones, I thought we were talking about the Replacements. So with that said, wear your mask, wash your hands, get that booster. The Omicron booster has been approved for folks who are immunocompromised or over 65. If you never got the bivalent booster, what are you waiting for? Get that booster before wedding season starts. So wear your mask, wash your hands, and keep enjoying your favorite things.
Hey listeners, Chris here. And before we jump into the episode, although I would love nothing more than for you to get to continue listening to Jesse do his impeccable impersonation of Jimmy Stewart, don't worry, you will hear more later in the episode. I want to tell you about a couple of podcasts that Jesse and I made some appearances on over the past few weeks or are doing some co-promotion with. I was on the Finding Favorites podcast with Leah Jones, as was Jesse in the past few weeks. I talked with Leah about my love of tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Blades in the Dark, Lancer, the list goes on and on. And Jesse was talking about a couple of movies from the 1970s. It was really fun to be on with Leah. She is an amazing host, asks lots of good questions, and I can really see why she has a successful podcast talking to people about things that they love. You can find them at findingfavorites.podbeam.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and get recommendations without using an algorithm. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I put out the call on Twitter and Instagram. I was heading into year 4 of the podcast and had interviewed all my friends. So I said, all right, friends, who are your friends that would be great on the podcast? And comedian and filmmaker Taya Lux sent me a message and said, you have to meet Phillip Mottaz. Phillip Mottaz. Phil Mottaz.
Phillip Mottaz.
So I reached out to Phillip on Instagram like a week ago, and here we are. How are you doing tonight?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah, we made this whirlwind thing come faster than I thought it was. It was the type of thing where I made myself an announcement. You sent out a calendar announcement, and then like Sunday night, it was like, you have a thing tomorrow. I'm like, I have a thing tomorrow. Yeah, but that's great.
Yeah, it worked fast. Like within a day, I started doing interviews again, and I had taken like a month off, so it's been really nice.
Oh, jump right back in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you said you've been doing this for 4 years.
I've been doing it for 3 years.
Almost 3
This was
years.
my COVID hobby.
Oh, okay.
Was podcasting.
Okay.
And it was, like many people, I got 2 hours a day back from commuting and lost every social obligation. And as a single person who lives alone, desperately needed to talk to people. Mm-hmm. So a podcast was the best outlet.
Yeah. No,
at the
that's great.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now I'm like 150 episodes deep, and so I'm pretty committed to it. And it's been a really great way to either reconnect with friends from college, talk to new people. It's a fun excuse to like make a stretch ask and ask people who are, celebrities in my brain to come on my podcast. And sometimes they say yes, and that's really neat.
It is neat. I know some people, especially during the pandemic, pulling back the curtain here, we are doing this over the internet. We're not actually in the same room. And that was like a huge game changer. I know I've one friend who does a music podcast, and he used to reach out to musicians and singers all the time, and it was real hit or miss, mostly miss. And then he would offer, we could do it online. And they were like, no, I don't know what you're doing. And then like a month into the pandemic, all of a sudden everybody knew how to do Zoom and everybody knew how to do this. And they weren't going out and touring. So he's like, hey, Brian Brian, the lead singer from AC/DC, want to be on the show? Yes, you do. You have nothing
Yep.
else to do. And so they jumped on.
Yeah. So it's really been wonderful. I've had a lot of fun. I've learned the technical skills of editing, and my ear has improved for like what sounds good.
Oh, that's good.
In an edit. And I've made friends. I've become closer friends with other friends who had podcasts, but now we can talk shop, and that's been fun too.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
You ingratiated yourself to the community and made your own little world.
Yeah.
Nice.
So we were talking, Teolux is how we were introduced.
Mm-hmm.
And before you made the move to LA, you were like, we went to, they weren't rival colleges, but Knox and Millikan were in the same, like, our sports teams played each other.
Yeah, we had a rivalry. Knox College had a rivalry with Monmouth College only by proximity, really. I mean, there's no stakes at all. This is not Alabama, Auburn. No, but it is worth noting that you actually knew where I went to college, or like I didn't have to explain. It was like, it's kind of in the middle. If you drive away from Chicago, but don't go all the way to St. Louis, like do that whole thing. So I was like, oh yeah, Millikan, sure, okay, we're at least in the same universe. Because a lot of times I can't even get anybody to. I'm just like, you'll never hear of it.
Right.
But yeah, that's funny.
My freshman year college roommate is in, I think, alumni relations now at Knox.
Oh my God.
Or fundraising.
I probably ignore their emails all the time.
I'm sure you do.
Sandra
Gray.
Sandra Gray. It rings a bell. And now I'll get to say, like, hey, we know somebody. No, I'm not going to do anything more but right now. But we know
introduced
her
to her husband.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Sort of.
Interesting.
I think I'm in their story. I'm in their story. I wasn't,
Did you hit them with a car, and then they thought they mistook the car, and then they jumped in the same car, and they fell in love?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, hey, let's see.
Tale as old as time.
Know.
You did do improv in Chicago.
I did. I did.
What were your circles? Were you like a Second City, IO?
I was IO. IO and little places like the Playground Theater was around then, and WNEP was a thing for a little while. I was also I was a notoriously bad auditioner. So like to get into Second City's program, you have to audition, and I didn't get into the program to learn how to do it. That was where I was. And to be fair, I am one of the people, because I went to Knox. I still remember we had a college improv group, but no one had seen anything. This is before the internet or anything, so we didn't watch Whose Line, and we didn't know any of those things. But like, it was an eye opener that I went to a comedy sports show, and I came back like it was the lamest, greatest epiphany ever. I'm like, guys, you're not gonna believe this. They didn't just stand in a line. And at one point, a guy was playing a character, first of all, and he left. He went through a door and was out of there for a little while. And it was like trying to explain, the plot of a movie to a Martian who has no idea what we're talking about. It was bizarre. And so that was where I was coming from. So when I went to Chicago and I'm like, I'm going to do this, I was at that level of like, this kid just learned that you don't have to stand in a line and talk. And and so it was a lot of that. And so the humble brag for myself was I eventually, so Second City passed on my audition. IO cashed the check. And my level 1 was not very good, and my level 2 got better. And I still remember, I took that round of classes. This is all thrilling, I know. But I took that round of classes with a lot of people I had in level 1. And in the end, there was a part when everyone went around and gave notes. And it was like one good thing, one bad thing, one thing to work on, that type of thing. And the most resounding notes I got was, you've really improved since the first thing. And it's not like I was great, but it was more like, you can you
Right.
you can string 3 words together without boring everyone to tears. And like, oh, and after the 5th time you hear it, you're like, oh, I get it. Like, you've really improved turns into like, you've really improved, like,
Yeah.
it's, yeah. But I, despite all that, I did it for a long while there. I did sketch comedy too, and writing various things and that kind of stuff. And then carried it on actually when I moved out to Los Angeles. I was at IO West there for a long time too. So yeah, still, I haven't improvised properly for a long while, but I did it for a long time. My parents decided for themselves that was me getting my master's degree.
Yeah.
That's what they told themselves. Anyway, that's what they told me. They told themselves. It's like, that's like him getting his post-grad.
It is. But there aren't student loans available other than from like MasterCard and Visa.
That's true. I saw a fun, this is like the most 2023 thing you could say, but I saw some funny meme on Instagram or something that was like how, if you had a business idea and you went to a bank, they'd be like, oh, I don't know, it's kind of shaky, we're not going to give you the money. But you know who we will give money to? A bunch of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. It was like, how many tens of thousands do you need? No sweat. Here you go. And you're like, yeah, that really is messed up. Of all the things messed up with student loans, it's like, oh yeah, that's a big one. It's not the best.
It's true. Yeah, so at that time, I did, so I was doing stand-up, which is why Taya and I how we met at the Tequila Roadhouse open mic, is they had sketch and stand-up and, like, readings. Like, it was...
Oh, okay. They did it all.
It was there was no music. Well, unless it was musical comedy. Like, Jeff Grace would come and sing a song.
Oh, Jeff Grace.
So it was the people I knew in that world were like Blaze Miller, Jeff Grace, and their crew, and then the stand-ups I knew were Kyle Kinane, Kumail Nanjiani, and Pete Holmes.
Oh, okay.
Those are the ones who are famous and alive.
Yeah. The 2 criteria.
I knew other ones who have since passed away.
Okay.
Not famous and dead. It was terrible. Comedy is brutal.
Yeah, it is. It's a weird little world. And Chicago in particular, I think, and I don't know if you feel this way, but growing up in the Midwest, I always kind of had sort of like a chip on my shoulder about the coast and just how, we're in the flyover states and whatever. And it's literally called the second city. And so, but I think that put into me this kind of like possessiveness over improv and over any kind of comedy in Chicago. Like that's the only place you can get it. Now, since I've been gone from there, I've kind of seen how it's like, wow, that's just like 2 starving dogs fighting over a bone. Like that is like, you can't tell me that this art form that produces no income is better than my art form that produces no, like, what are we fighting about here? And really, and I mean, it's all like hard stuff that's hard to explain to your grandma what it is. It is this. It's this thing that you love. And like I said, when I moved out to Los Angeles, I know I had a little bit of that. Well, I came from Chicago with me that I mercifully, hopefully, quickly lost, because there was a lot of talented people here too. And I was like, oh, that is bullshit. That I just like, oh, it still kind of existed in there. And it was actually, I guess we can talk about it a little bit because IO is no more, but there was a long-standing requirement that in order to teach classes there, you had to have gone through the Chicago brand of the program.
Oh.
Which almost sounds like, as a starter, I kind of get it, because it's like, oh, come from the home office so then you can go out. But that was, 14 years ago or something, and like we've had some other people and we've learned some other things, and there's these other schools and other classes around here, so maybe don't be so like black and white about it. I think they eventually backed off on that, but it was little things like that that were still kind of in there a bit, and I'm glad to be away from that part of it. I miss kind of the shows and stuff and the atmosphere, but you know, that weird little this is our thing possessiveness never went away.
Yeah. I could understand it in like the first 3 years iOS is open because you haven't trained the next generation of improvisers yet. Like, they're still coming up.
They probably are blown away by some guy who went out of a scene to go through a door like I was. Like, that guy left through the door. They're like, we can't have him teach.
Yeah, I eventually did take improv. Like, I went through 1 through 5 at annoyance.
Oh, okay.
Because I got tired of people asking me if I did improv. And I was like, no, I do stand-up. It's different.
Yeah.
And so eventually I went through annoyance, and that was, I mean, I feel like it gave me a lot of skills that are really helpful in my corporate 9 to 5. Just because being able to think on your feet. So did open mics, going to open mics. Like,
yeah, I bet.
No CEO is scarier than drunk people at the Cubby Bear who find themselves at a comedy open mic in 2004.
Yes. And something about them insists that they are part of the show. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's terrifying. I get it. I think I have a little bit of that too. Of like, now I'm applying those skills to other things. I have a day job as well, but I also am a novelist, and there's sometimes I don't do the whole like pantsing thing, but I know for better or worse, there's a part of me that's kind of like, sometimes, you know, like in the morning when I'm supposed to be getting my words in, I'm kind of like, I could do this, you know, which definitely comes from, we're 15 minutes into this 40-minute show and we don't have an idea. I was like, screw it. I'm just going to make a choice and we'll go. And oftentimes that is not necessarily useful right from the jump, but it gets you going and then you're off and running.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's some skills in there.
Yeah. And you do have 2 books out, at least that are available on Bookshop. You may
That's
have
true.
more. You have The Murderous Haircut of the Mayor of Bel Air and The Homicidal Hairstyle of the Viral Video Vixen.
Correct. Yeah,
Tell me a little bit about these books.
with very tasteful titles. They are mystery books. They are the first 2 in a series, the Psychic Barber Mysteries. And in them, the main character, her name is Danica Lumen, is a hairstylist. And she's also secretly psychic. She can touch the back of people's heads and read their minds. Ooh. And she normally uses this at the salon by asking people, you know, as you do, just like, what type of style do you want? And then she starts messing with their hair and engaging with that part of the brain she engages with. And she sees the perfect style and those little like extra touches that their hearts desire and she can make happen. And then the first book starts when she's doing that, but she's doing it to a new customer. Instead of seeing a hairstyle, she sees a murdered body. And so she obviously freaks out, and one thing leads to another that she decides it is up to her to figure out who that is, who killed them, why they got killed, and everything else. So it's an amateur sleuth type of mystery.
Ooh.
Yeah. They're fun. It's been fun to write. I mean, I've always liked mystery novels, but this is another bit of that improv thing of like, I can do this. But I did a couple years back, I guess it's almost 6 years back, I did the National Novel Writing Month in November. It was actually through my day job. They had a thing set up there, and there was a guy there who said, you know, they were explaining how in 30 days, the 30 days of November, you have to write 50,000 words. But in this guy's, I still like owe him a birthday card for it, where he's like, they don't have to be great words. And I was like, oh, my bread and butter is making not great words. I can totally do that. So I like plotted out, you know, loosely, I used an Excel spreadsheet and like figured out, I was like, okay, if the story is about this, then it needs to be, like on day 5, I should be dealing with this part. And by day 20, I'll be dealing with this. And just like hammered through a first draft. And that wasn't even one of these books, but I saw that I could do it. And then I went back and was like, oh, but I have this idea about this woman who has psychic abilities and is a hairstylist, and she ends up, in over her head everywhere. Can I do that? And so I started plotting it out and did it that way. And then I wrote a draft and wrote a draft and wrote a draft. And then, now I have 2, and I have the third one should be coming out, but probably early next year. So early 2024.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's been a lot of fun. And that's another like funny little community of weirdos that I've now plugged myself into. Like,
so are
people who
these
like mysteries
considered cozy mysteries?
Excellent question. Points for Milliken again. They are I personally would call it like cozy light, because for those of you who don't know, a cozy mystery is, if you think Murder, She Wrote, or if you think like the Hallmark Channel has a mystery thing, right, where there's no gratuitous violence, there's no on-screen sex. Usually they find a dead body in like a quaint business of some sort, and an amateur sleuth has to do it. So mine has like amateur sleuth, check, sort of funny job situation, check, found dead body, check, but like she doesn't have a cat or a dog. That's a big thing.
Yep.
The title is more gaudy than like, I was reading a cozy mystery recently about, it was a record store place, and the title is called Vinyl Resting Place, which I mean is
clever.
The reason why I got it.
Yeah.
But so I don't have, it's like just shy of cozy. And I realize this is another like lesson I either picked up or learned from improv, which is like, that's not the most marketable thing. You actually want to be like hardcore cozy or hardcore, hard boiled or something. Mine's more, honestly, more like in the vein of Rear Window or Knives Out, where it's like, I mean, there's violence. It's not excessive and it's not super gross or gory, but it's like, sometimes there's some knife stuff that happens, and that's bad. So, but I'm glad you asked. Usually I either leave it or have to explain. It's like, I call it cozy, kinda. Do you know what a cozy is? But you've obviously encountered the cozy.
I have encountered the cozy because I've had books. A friend of mine writes, I believe, cozy mysteries. They're mysteries with recipes in them.
That's it.
Like the
that
recipe
is
books?
absolutely it. Yes.
It's the sipped and stirred series, I think.
Oh, I might have even seen that before. Okay, yeah, but that's another thing too. Is like a lot of those books will be like, oh, you've got a recipe, or my wife actually read a whole series of crochet mysteries.
Oh.
Yeah, that was another sort of like semi-encouraging thing to be like, you can do that? I guess you can. So this person did a bunch. Did probably like 10 books. But the sip and stirred, okay, I think I've actually heard of those. I'm
trying to... Gottlieb is her last name.
Okay.
I'm having a moment. Let me look. I'm just gonna look at her Facebook real quick.
we gotta know. I was gonna say, if you knew one of the titles, we'd know for sure. But also,
let's see.
The fact that it has missed. Yeah, it's like, Dashiell Hammett didn't put recipes in his stories.
It's a whipped and sipped mystery. G.P. Gottlieb. So it's Battered is the first one.
Okay, that's great. The cozy thing is funny. I have a strange kind of admiration for it, because it does take a certain someone to be able to do it. And I am finding for myself that I don't know if I am that person. It's like, I don't know enough about recipes to interject that in there necessarily. I'm sure there's opinions that I could force on someone. Now that I think about it, it's probably like, oh, I just didn't find my version of the recipe. But but they're a lot of fun, and I actually I've gotten to come to my son's school. He's in middle school, like 8th grade right now. But I've gotten to come there and talk to the 6th grade class because there's like a mystery portion that the English teacher teaches. So I've gotten to teach, like stand in front of the class and talk about books and stuff. And one of the things I'll do is I'll test them on knowing genres. And it's like, well, here's some big ones. There's noir, there's thriller, like super scary thriller, and then there's cozy. And they're like, what's that? And we're like, well, here's some covers. And then I show them, like, here's a crime noir. It's like Devil in a Blue Dress. I'm like, okay. They're like thriller, and anything by Riley Sager. And then it's like the Sip and Stirred mysteries. They're like Battered, and they're like, oh, got it. It looks like a blanket. And you're like, yes.
Yeah. Or like, I mean, I must have read 20 The Cat Who by Lillian Jackson Braun growing up.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Or Rita Mae Brown and Sweetie Pie Brown. Is it Rita Mae Brown? She's like a super prolific author, but she herself also has a cat-based mystery where her cat is the co-author.
Adorable.
It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
That she's like, yeah, I'm gonna do this. Let's see your recipes now, sucker.
Yeah.
My cat wrote this. How cozy is that?
So I looked up G.P. Gottlieb on Bookshop.
Okay.
She's got to fix her website. She has written Battered, Smothered, and Charred.
Wow. See?
Those are her 3 whipped and sipped mysteries.
Whipped and sipped. That's it.
Yep.
Whipped and sipped.
Yeah.
Those are good. And I like, the puns are the fun thing. And I like that I was like, I'm just going to cut right to it. Battered.
Right.
You get it?
Yeah. What are things that you can do to food and dead bodies?
Yeah. Pretty much. When I was trying to come up with a title, I did go through, I had a huge document of just like, okay, what are the barber puns? What are the haircut, any kind of scissors things? And, it's like a little off the top of your life. And, a bunch of those type of things. And then I just decided, when I basically recognized for myself that it was like, well, it's not really in that vein. And even like when you look up when you go to a bookstore or when you look up cozy mysteries online, like you can tell they look like a quilt. Yeah. Right. And I was like, I like our cover art for this. So we're going with this, like, gregarious, I don't know, gregarious is the right word. But audacious title that sounds like a cheap B movie in a way. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go for this. This is what I am.
Yeah.
Trying too hard and being big is what I am. But it's fun. And I think in events, I've gotten to do like in-store events and talk to different people. And I always felt like those titles have gotten the right kind of laugh. No one is like, it's not going to offend anybody, and no one's like upset by it. And they're just like, oh, you kind of know what you're in for with this, right? I mean, like, I always said it's like she has psychic abilities by touching the backs of people's heads, and she's like the lamest X-Men character ever. I was like, what are you're gonna walk around LA and just touch people's heads? She's like, yeah, I have this power, but like, what am I supposed to do? Well, you're gonna have to do actual detective work, apparently.
Right.
He's like, damn it, rats. So yeah, a little bit of humor in there. It was bound to happen.
Yeah. Great. So I will link to those. I have recently started a Finding Favorites storefront on bookshop.org.
Ooh.
Where I list all the books by authors that come on and also the books we talk about. So there's 2 little lists, so your books will be on there, and I'll add the books that we've talked about as well.
Neat. I'm going to make it a personal goal to try to become one of the books that gets talked about.
Yeah.
Dual citizenship for me.
Yes. I will have GP on, and then I can say,
yes.
Hey, I was talking about you. So, Philip, we are not just here to talk about whether or not we showed up at the same bars in Chicago in the early aughts, and the intricacies of the CCIW league or whatever, Yeah. But also one of your favorite things, and we when you filled out your form, you said there were two possibilities. One is the band The Ramones, and the second was typewriters.
Yes.
Where did you land?
Well, I think considering how much we've talked about books and writing, I'm going to talk about the Ramones.
All right.
I'm going to talk about them. If for nothing else, the fact that you said, "Oh yeah, I make a page of the books mentioned." I'm like, there's so many Ramones. There's so many Ramones books, and I've read so many of the Ramones books.
Great.
Out there, they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna fill that thing with useless shout outs to things that people might enjoy."
Outstanding.
So yeah, I'm going with the Ramones. I'm gonna stick with them.
So you used to have, was it a song a week Ramones? You had a podcast about the Ramones, and you listened to the whole discography?
Yeah, it was called Ramones of the Day, and we I partially stole the idea from another show about the Beatles. And what they did was they basically took every released Beatles song and alphabetized it and discussed every single one per episode. And usually the episodes were like, ours were on the 20-minute-ish realm, right? So yeah, everything from 53rd to the word zero, we were, I think it's like 190 songs total. Wow. Like 5 years ago, I would have been able to be like, oh, it's this and this many albums. But yeah, we went through every single one. And in the course of that, we got to interview C.J. Ramone, who was the replacement bass player. We got to interview Ed Stasium, who was the engineer and producer of, like, to Ramone's heads, he's like the one guy who got them. You're like, if there was like a dependable sound, it was like, oh, Ed's on that one. And we got to talk to not one but two roadies named Matt, who were with them for like 10 years at a time and just, saw a bunch of wild shit.
Right.
Yeah, me and my friend Molly, who also knows Taya, did the whole show together, and sort of like what you were saying earlier about, having a podcast like this and being able to reach out to people. It is also just kind of nice to be like, well, we scheduled a conversation for ourselves. It's like a friend date. But yeah, it was roughly. Sometimes we released 2 episodes a week, sometimes 1. That was another thing we realized too, is like, we're our own bosses. So if things get weird and we're tired or we really can't meet, it was like, we're not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sorry. We'll be back.
Right.
But yeah, I conned her into doing it and made it all the way through the end.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, the Ramones, are either. This is where Milliken's good. You were so impressed, and now you're gonna be like, yeah, she went to Milliken.
Oh man, yeah.
They're either British or from Minnesota, and I can never remember which one.
Not at all. I can see how you would get British based on the fact that Joey Ramone, the singer, sang on like the first album with sort of an English accent.
Okay.
That and the fact that they were very well received in England, and something I'll save everybody the trouble of listening to 180 episodes of our show, but something we would often debate is like, why weren't they more successful, or what would have happened, and what is their legacy? And I kind of fell on the side of, I think their legacy was they showed a bunch of other people how to do this. And one group of people was the Clash, the Sex Pistols, and the Damned, and everybody in the British punk scene. Like there's some, it sounds hypocritical, but it's true. There's some show that they do in like 1976 or something, and like everybody from the Clash goes to it. Half the Sex Pistols go to it. Like, oh shoot, what's her name from the Pretenders? Chrissy Hind. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just like everybody's there, right? And they all like learn from that. We're like, oh, we can do it like this. We can just like,
You can leave the stage and go through a door.
Yes, they all had the lame epiphany. But there's some story where, like, I think it's the guys from the Clash say, like, you know, they saw them, like, before the show. You know, like, hey, we heard you're playing. And it was like, we're in a band, but we haven't played yet. And they're like, why? And I was like, you're not very good. And it was like, wait till you see us. It's like, that doesn't matter. Just get up there and, like, commit to it. And they're all like, yeah. So maybe you get that English part of them, but they're actually all from Queens, New York.
Okay.
Yep. They are New York. They are very, for better or worse, a very American product. Very American band. But yeah, for an album, they sang. That's often a thing where people are like, are these guys British? Because there's a weird accent. Joey's a weird singer anyway, but it's a weird voice happening in there.
So were they like a CBGBs?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. So they're part of that group with, like, Television, Talking Heads, Blondie, and I think Patti Smith is in there too, who, yeah, there's no place to really do live music except for this one Bowery bar where, like, homeless guys scraped together quarters and bought drinks, and then yeah. So they were kind of open to everything. But yeah, that was sort of their home base, and then they grew out of that.
All right.
To a point.
So let's start with your relationship with the Ramones.
Okay.
When did you get your first Ramones album?
Ooh. I'm gonna dodge that question to make sure I sound cool. But I'll also out myself as not being cool. So
it was from Columbia House.
No, it's even labor. No, actually owned an album. I bet I was in my early 20s. And I was born the same year as their first album came out.
Okay.
So it's not like I was like a contemporary, but I mean, I could have done something in college, but I did not. My first exposure to them was, honest to God, was probably their very brief appearance on a Simpsons episode, where they play Mr. Burns' birthday. And it was like, oh, okay. And then, then you just hear them around and stuff. My wife will never let me forget that she is probably more responsible for my love of the Ramones than anybody, because when we started dating, I noticed she had a greatest hits album, like a CD. She owned like 8 total CDs, and one of them was Ramones Mania, of all things. Yeah, I know yeah, she's interesting. But I liked that a lot and listened to it a lot. And then I listened to it enough that then I was like, well, I'm going to go explore more of this. And then I bought, I guess the first album I bought would have probably been when I was maybe 20. But it wasn't just an album, because they put out, their albums are notoriously short. They're 30 minutes long. And in the dawn of CDs, they would often they would put like 2 albums on. So I think my first album was actually the first 2 albums that they put on one CD. So it's just the title, the Ramones, that's the name of the first album, right into Leave Home. It was like, that was it. So probably about 20 years old, I think.
Okay.
And then shortly after that, then I started getting into more and more into them. I was like, it also coincided with the label releasing more albums with like demos and live stuff, and I think that's a measure of how into a band you are, is like, how many demos do you own, or how many do you actually listen to? Because I have a bunch, but I don't listen to a bunch, but I will listen to them, partly because they don't sound that far off from what the other finished versions do, but also just because they're great. They sound awesome. Yeah. That was a long way to say, see what I mean? It wasn't, from where I was from, I'm from the middle of Illinois, where we were all, especially in the 80s and 90s, at least 5 years behind everything. I didn't have, I always like to say, it wasn't until I moved to Chicago in the 2000s that I legitimately met someone who didn't like Star Wars. Like, that's what I'm dealing with. Like, everybody liked the same thing, or like, that's it. No critical thinking about it. It's just, it's
Right.
just this. Most popular thing? Great. Yeah, we all love it. The end.
Yeah. So I asked you jokingly if you had gotten it from Columbia House,
Yeah.
because Columbia House Records is from my hometown. So
Oh,
Terre
man. So
Haute,
more,
like,
yeah, no, I did not. But that would have been, that would have
If you
almost
ever
been
tried to-
eerie. That would have almost been an eerie connection to be like, I used to fill out envelopes for the Illinois
Are you
division.
sure I didn't pack the envelope? No. A number of my high school friends, that was their first office job, was like working
really?
telemarketing at Columbia House for sure.
I never. Well, okay. Well, office job. That wasn't that, but one of my first jobs was in college. I worked at a video and music store, and so
Nice.
that was another reason why I picked up what I picked up, because you could get it at cost,
Mm-hmm.
and use stuff too, which was also awesome. My
Yeah.
friend and I would just go through, anybody who would trade stuff in, we're like, thanks, just pulling it aside. Yeah, we were not financially sound.
And this is just my ignorance, but have they, in your life as a fan, has there ever been a version of the Ramones that has toured that you've been able to see live?
No.
Okay.
No. By the time I'm a total poser in this way, where by the time I was really into them, Joey, the singer, was already passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And then shortly after that, Dee Dee died.
Mm-hmm.
And then a few years later, Johnny died. And then a few years later, Tommy died. So like the original
Okay.
four, the names you'll see on the classic t-shirt, they have
Yep.
all passed away within the years like 2000 to 2012, maybe something like
Okay.
that, or maybe a little later. But Tommy was a hangout, or hung on there. I've seen some people afterwards, like I've seen CJ Ramone after the fact, which honest to God is almost the same thing, because like it's some of his stuff, but then half of it is like, what classic Ramones songs do you want to hear? Because here it
Yeah.
is.
Sure.
But no, I've never gotten to see it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, not live. I've seen videos.
Yeah.
Doesn't count. I've seen Rock and Roll High School.
And then what's the path that takes you from you start getting into them in your 20s to being a big enough fan and a completist enough fan to launch your own podcast?
Besides just that wonderful arrogance that comes with being a straight white man, and thinking, oh, I can do it. Nobody asked me to, no problem. Besides that, another thing that really helped me was I was interested in learning how to play the guitar around that time that I was really starting to pick up with them. And, you picked up enough information about the Ramones that said they don't have a lot of complicated songs. I'm going to because the fan that I am is like, I don't want to say that they're easy to play, but it is mostly like 4 chords. So as I was playing this little like flea market guitar and just trying to pick out the songs, and it was in the, this pre-social media, pre-smartphone stuff. So I'd have to I would steal copy paper from work and print out guitar tabs to Rockaway Beach or whatever. And then I would come home and try to figure it out from that. And then occasionally, like one time I got like a lesson and stuff, but that I think is when I really started kind of internalizing and thinking about the band. Because when you start playing, I don't know, did you play any instruments? You ever played any instruments? Yeah. I don't know if you do this then, but I am not I love music. I think about music and musicians a lot, but I've never like written music. I've never really gotten to play it outside of like marching band in high school. And so in these moments when it's basically just you sitting in a room with the album playing and your crappy acoustic guitar, I end up thinking about the people who wrote this. Because now, in my imagination, I'm with them. And like we're all participating together, and I'm on beat with them. So that must mean that I have something in common with them. What could that possibly be from these 4 derelicts? What could that be? And so then you start you know, reading books about them and reading interesting things about them. And the fact of the matter is that I loved the music. The thing that I think really told me that I could probably talk about them for over 100 episodes was that they were at least 3, if not 4, just super weird, entertaining, interesting, weirdo people. Like they're just bizarre. And the books that were either written about them or by them both supported those things and like just threw curveballs at everything. And it was a lot of fun. Like I said, I just liked thinking about it. Like, for example, so Joey Ramone is the singer. Johnny is the guitarist. Joey is half Jewish. He is like 6'7", weighing 105 pounds soaking wet. He has a undiagnosed OCD. He's like a bleeding heart liberal, hard on his sleeve, you know, loves the Ronettes, all that stuff. Johnny is a hardcore Republican, like a hardcore Reagan right-wing dude. At one point, a woman named Linda dated Joey for a while and then dated Johnny and eventually married Johnny. And it has never not fascinated me to think that was like, so there's a person out there who's like, my type is one of those two guys. Like, I like both of those. And I'm like, that is the difference between like a pizza and a sandwich that fell on the ground. Like they are so they are so far apart. And it's weird to think that they existed together, and like all the little dramas and all those little nuances, I just like really like thinking about. It just is really, really strange to me. And it's also so far removed from
high school friends. Were they brothers? Did they like?
They were not brothers.
I feel like you have to have like a soul connection young to be able to.
So okay, sure. I will try to be brief. I swear. You can get the extended version someplace else. But the short story is that there were these guys, 4 guys, growing up in Queens. And they liked music. They really loved music. They liked sort of like the pre-psychedelic rock and roll music. They liked Little Richard, and they liked the early Beatles, and I mean they liked the old Beatles too, but you know, like they liked short and sweet pop rock. And at the time in the 70s, it just wasn't happening. They were also like uniquely unskilled. Like I think Johnny had a construction job but lost it, and Dee Dee has like real mental and chemical imbalances, and I don't know what he would do otherwise. Tommy was the drummer and sort of the visionary of it. He was already working like as a sound engineer, but he had this idea, and he was friends with Johnny and Dee Dee. And they wanted a singer, and they thought Dee Dee could do it, but Dee Dee couldn't play bass and sing at the same time. And meanwhile, this weirdo guy from down the street that they knew, but they weren't like best friends with him, is named Jeffrey Hyman, and eventually became named as Joey Ramone. They brought him in to be the drummer, and he was okay, but he wasn't great. And then somehow they heard him sing, and they knew he sang for some other band that didn't go anywhere. And Tommy's the one who said, or, you know, somehow said, I don't know if he said it right then in the moment, but he basically looked at it and was like, okay, it's the mid-70s for us, and every band wants to be basically like Led Zeppelin and The Who and have this gorgeous, beautiful singer in the front.
Right.
What if we don't? What if we just have this guy who has his own unique charms but does not look like what anybody on earth would say should be the front man? And he'll be there. He can barely stand. He doesn't have to move. Just let him hold on to the mic, and he'll be there. And like, Dee Dee, all you have to do is just keep pounding that bass in 4/4 time constantly. Johnny, you just keep strumming the guitar like that at 4/4 time constantly. Just be in your positions and do that. And it's like this weird alchemy of, they were all kind of outsider weirdos. They were the only ones around. I think one of them tells a story. It was like Joey was the only other person who liked the Stooges that they knew. You know, and they were like, it was the four of them, you know, the 4 or 5 kids who just hung around. And that was apparently that, and the desire to be in a band was enough for them to decide to do this thing together. And then they started just writing really weird songs that made them laugh, and then they did it. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Now that I say it out loud, I'm like, I don't know why. How did they keep going? And I don't know how they did it.
I mean, it is hard to remember because we've been so online now for 20 years. Just proximity and lack of information.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, we're on the same cul-de-sac, we're on the same block. I guess we're a band, right? Like,
yeah,
that made a lot of decisions for you.
Sometimes I kind of miss that a little bit, you know, just the idea of like going to a record store or those type of things. And yeah, it's something that is definitely it's at least changed. I don't know if it's gotten better or worse, but it's definitely changed. And yeah, that's the sort of thing where I was like, well, I guess these are my friends because these are the people who I can get to. Yeah, and it culls down as your tastes. If you're like, well, I like these things and they don't, well, I was like, well, those guys can kick rocks. I guess I'm hanging out with these guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a weird thing that it would just happen, and enough of those people liked each other enough to stick together, but then eventually did not like each other very much, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that proximity is definitely, there's some chemistry in there.
So none of them were Ramone.
No.
That is
the name,
the stage family name.
Yes, the name Ramone comes from Dee Dee called himself, his name is Douglas, but he called himself Dee Dee Ramone because he'd heard a story that Paul McCartney used an alias when he checked into hotels, Paul Ramone. So they called themselves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And apparently they had a bunch of trouble at the beginning convincing people they weren't like a salsa band for a while because they heard the Ramones and they were like, oh, where's your horns?
Oh.
You know? And they're like, it's not this again.
Right.
They would get, yeah, it's a weird thing. Although when you think about it, a lot of musicians anyway, but a lot of the musicians in the 70s was like a lot of different names. It was like even Elton John and David Bowie. It's like, that's not their names. They just made up names. It just happens these 4 clowns all decided, it was like, what if we all had the same name?
Right.
And the first names are kind of cutesy. And you're like, okay, great. What?
Just go for it.
Yeah, it's just go for it. I would get really excited thinking about it, that reading about like their origins of like what they wanted to do is they wanted to be like the Beach Boys or like Herman's Hermits, those type of things. And that just cracks me up because I'm like, but you ended up with this? Like that's nobody would do it that way. And I'm glad for it. It's just the weirdest thing, and I don't know how really it happened. I've read it in a bunch of different books from a bunch of different perspectives, but I think a lot of it is just kind of like happy accidents and weird taste.
Yeah. So it's a 2-part question.
Okay, go.
Tackle one at a time.
All right.
What are the essential books on the Ramones, and what are the essential albums if somebody is new to the Ramones?
Oh my God.
Two huge questions.
2 huge questions. Okay. Essential books. I'm going to say, okay, I'll give you a couple. There's one, I'll get her name to you after this. But there's a book called Why the Ramones Matter. It's like a book series of why the blank band matters. But this woman has her doctorate in it's like art criticism or something, wrote a really interesting book about why the Ramones matter. That kind of goes through their whole thing, but also just like puts them in the place of history, you know, like everything that came up to this point, and here's what they changed and that sort of stuff. So that's sort of interesting.
Builds out their like influence family tree from of the bands that came from them.
Right. And then there's a ton of biographies. So I'm going to give a soft plug for Dee Dee's autobiography, mostly because it's not the most accurate, but it's definitely entertaining. Whereas like I never was so conscious of an autobiography with an untrustworthy narrator in my life than this. And it's just written in such a way it was like it makes sense, but also you're like, what the hell is happening in this story? But probably the best one is Marky Ramone. He was the replacement drummer, but he also was in that CBGB world. Punk Rock Blitzkrieg is good at like explaining that, but also with just like enough removal that you're not so precious of everything. You know what I mean? So it's also frankly just like that's the best written one. So those would be mine. Punk Rock Blitzkrieg and Why the Ramones Matter. And now the hard one. Well, please restate it while I stammer and think of an excuse to give.
If somebody thinks the Ramones are a band from Minnesota, for example.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yes. So I partly cheated because I kind of anticipated this. I'm going to give you another complicated 2-part answer. An easy jumping in point, album-wise, is their third album, arguably their best, called Rocket to Russia.
Okay.
And that one will have Sheena as a punk rocker on it. It'll have Rockaway Beach. It also has Teenage Lobotomy and a couple of fun covers. It's like the most accessible but also loudest version of their sound. You know, it's like this really does just sound like old style rock and roll, just with a lot of amplifiers. But if you want to see the one like funny experiment that I've done a couple times is try to play the music that happened either concurrently or prior to the Ramones and then play them. So I was writing down some titles of the similar type of thing, like there's this guy called Alan O'Day who wrote Undercover Angel, and Rod Stewart's Do You Think I'm Sexy, and Neil Diamond and Barbra Streisand's You Don't Bring Me Flowers. Those were all released in the late 70s. So what you're going to do is you're going to play those songs, and then you're going to play the first 7 tracks of the Ramones live album It's Alive, which was recorded in like New Year's Day 1977. And the first 7 tracks are, for my money, like my favorite 7 rock tracks, because it does everything the Ramones do in one of the best ways possible, which is there's almost no chatter, and if there's chatter, it's just as like 3 sentences as one, where it's like, hey, we're the Ramones and this is called Rockaway Beach, 1 2 3 4, like that, and into it. And
great,
their part will last 15 minutes and you'll get 7 songs out of it, and that's your taste. And if you can take it from there, there's plenty more where that came from. But if nothing else, I think like those type of things, like contrasting it with, you know, like Leif Garrett and that type of stuff, which has its place, it also just shows how different it is, and how like, you can really, I feel like you can really feel their energy and what they're putting into, like they committed to downstrokes. There's never an upstroke in a Ramones song on the guitar, which sounds easy until you do it. And then you realize they're insane for doing this for so long and so fast. It really hurts your arm. And we're like, nope, that's the way it sounds. It has to sound like that. And if you play along with the songs like I have, and you eventually cheat, you're like, yeah, it doesn't sound the same. There's something missing in it, whatever anger psychosis they have. But that's my long answer, is like, make yourself a little mini playlist of like Light FM, and then go into the first 7 songs of their live album, It's Alive.
Great.
And
I will.
Your neighbors will.
I'll make
think
a
you're
playlist on Spotify or YouTube, and I'll add.
One of my neighbors
did
actually back in Chicago. I remember we met one of our downstairs neighbor, and she was like, I'm like, oh yeah, you know, we live upstairs, and she was like, oh, are you guys the ones who are always playing the Ramones songs? I'm like, oh, yeah. Did we freeze?
We froze
no.
for a second.
Oh no, was it me? I'm sorry, dear
Can't
listeners.
tell. Let's see. But I can hear you now. You're back. No.
All of this Ramones talk. Aw, she went away. Just you. Whoa, 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 whoa.
Hello.
Hello?
I'm back.
Hello, you're back. What happened?
My internet blipped.
What should we do?
It started to glitch right when I think a neighbor was commenting on your
Oh, yeah.
love of the Ramones.
Yeah, it's how we met one of our downstairs neighbors in Chicago. I was playing the CDs over and over and trying to get the songs into the guitar, or out of the guitar, I should say. And just one time I met them on the way up, and it was like, "Oh, you live up there?" Like, "Oh, you live down there?" And then they said, "Wait, are you the apartment that plays the Ramones all the time?" And we're like, "Yeah."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I turned it down for a little while.
Yeah.
And then, then she moved.
Great.
Lots of complaints. No, yeah, I've lived with it for a long time. I've inflicted it on many people with varying results.
What is your son? Is he embarrassed by the Ramones, or has he embraced them?
I don't think he's definitely not embraced them. He was a little not for it when the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles had like a whole Ramones thing, like a punk rock thing, which I wanted to go to, and we did.
Yeah.
And we made him like pose in front of stuff, and they had like a bigger than life size poster of that first album, and I remember we put him up there, and without prompting he had like a sourpuss like the rest of them, so it's like okay, I guess it's perfect. I mean, yeah, he's agnostic, maybe.
Sure.
He's definitely lived with it more than I did at this age. But he's definitely into his own stuff. I'm just clinging to the past. It's something though that I have had to consider, because he has some friends. He occasionally plays music with friends, and some of them are way more into it than others. And I have had to sort of like put the brakes on my own enthusiasm to be like, I don't, it's like we don't really need more of this. It was like, if they are interested in this music, it's here. But this is also like, this is their own thing, and they can find their own fun. Now, to be fair, the song that they're playing for like a talent show is Weezer's Buddy Holly, so it's like it's not that far removed from like exactly what I want to hear. But I've also like just recognizing for myself in that sort of, you're a maturing dad, to say like, you don't have to like make your kid play football, like that type of mentality. This would have been my like, oh, you're gonna play football thing. I was like, no, I don't want to do that to him. I don't want to do that to anybody. So they have their own tastes. They can find their own stuff. And
here's the thing, and their tastes are the oldies, things we listened to in college.
Oh, it's so humbling and terrible. It's awful. Man.
I went to a bat mitzvah maybe last summer, where the bat mitzvah girl has done like School of Rock summer camp.
Oh yeah.
And her like 10-piece Chicago School of Rock band played a set at her party, and it was all 90s songs.
Sounds awesome.
It was all, they were playing the oldies, and I'm like, this is how our parents felt when we played the Beatles.
Yeah. Yes. I think there's something to that, but then also at the same time, I don't know, and it's not like I'm like so into the music scene now, but I don't know what I would tell them to play now if you were like, okay, we have a bunch of kids and like we need guitars and bass and that sort of stuff. It's like guitar music like peaked in the 90s and had like a little blip of that garage rock thing at the beginning of the 2000s, and then it's kind of not been that.
Right.
So in a way, it's like, well, it's them or older. Yeah, you're either going to be playing Weezer and Green Day, or we're going into Def Leppard or something.
Right.
Yeah, but
it's true. I would be very uncomfortable by a bat mitzvah age band playing "Pour Some Sugar on Me."
Although saying that out loud, I can't even imagine how many times that has happened. That has to.
I'm sure.
They had to have gotten. It had to have happened enough that surely by now someone had to say the song. Like, we have to not play that song anymore.
Right. It's
There's
about
lots of
brunch.
songs.
It is a song about brunch.
It's a song about brunch. Yeah, we do it when they bring out treats.
Yeah.
It's funny, Daryl. We're getting looks from the moms and dads. We have to stop.
Yeah. Philip, is there anything about the Ramones that I haven't asked that you had wanted to make sure that you said?
Oh, man. Well, I got to do that whole rant about the, make yourself a playlist to set yourself up to be blown away by the greatest band ever. I don't think there is too much. I would encourage people to watch Rock and Roll High School, if for no other reason than it's like not a good movie, but it's kind of great. Mm-hmm. Like it's a Roger Corman production from the 70s, so they didn't have much money, but it's legitimately funny, and the filmmakers were saddled with they went out and actually recruited the Ramones. They had a bunch of other bands, but then the director wanted the Ramones to be in it, and then I think he met them and was like, he envisioned making Hard Day's Night. Mm-hmm. Where like, oh, they're like the stars of it. And then I think he met them and was like, holy shit, we can't do that. Like this, like Dee Dee's line, Dee Dee has one line, maybe two lines. One is, hey, pizza. And pizza's great, let's dig in. And I mean, he barely gets them out. That's it. I mean, that's what he's working with. So they had to make up a whole other story. If nothing else, watch it with like that eye to be like, wow, how to make something from nothing. But then there's still like their performance, when they're actually performing themselves, they're great. And the filming of it is awesome. And you're like, yeah, this is what it's about.
Nice.
It's that would be my closing thing. It's like, that's worth checking out too.
All right.
Yeah. I
where
can say
can people
more.
Oh, what about the podcast? I assume it is still available.
Podcast is still out there. Podcast is still out there. Like the Ramones, we retired. We just I promised Molly promised me she would get through the end, and then it was like, and that's it.
It's a lot of songs.
It's a lot of songs. And I also kind of like this sort of ties into books and that type of thing. Even though I have a series, the books I've written, I designed them so you didn't have to read the prior ones in order to get the story. I like endings, and something else besides, us missing that, like, oh, it's nice to like rely on your neighbors as your friend circle and stuff like that. Something I kind of miss from like modern TV and movies is things that end. Like the end, it's done. It's not like, oh, and now you have to come back for like part 2 of 5, whatever.
Right.
So in that same vein, we did the same thing with the show about the Ramones, which was like, we said we were going to cover these songs. We covered these songs, and then we stopped, and then we finished the end.
Yep.
Yeah. But it is still out there.
And what is it called?
It's called Ramones of the Day. Like remains of the day, but about the Ramones.
The Ramones.
That's a cozier mystery title than the one I came up with for my own book.
Well, for the second cozy series you start about a DJ who solves mysteries.
That's not a bad idea. A DJ's a good idea. Because you can go to lots of different places.
Listen to my interview with Michael Shelley.
Okay.
He's a DJ on WFMU, which is one of the only open format radio stations left in the country.
Okay.
And I saw him in 1999 at Milliken open for They Might Be Giants.
Wow.
And I've been listening to a CD of his since 1999. And
every
found
bat
him on
mitzvah
Twitter.
plays it.
Yep. Found him on Twitter, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago when I was going through it, like listening to the CD again. And I had him on, and he talks about the radio station, and I don't know. I'm just going to give you Michael Shelley as a protagonist, who would be an outstanding.
I love it.
sleuth.
It's not a bad idea. Like I was saying earlier about the the stories of like recipes and like, dog handling tips and whatever. You can tell that those writers are into that, and I'm just not. But I could sure talk about like this album needs this and that, like those type of things. Like, oh man, I could stop the story to talk about that. Just because you mentioned it and because you mentioned the 90s. One series that I am going to write, I'm in the process of writing, is where the protagonists are Noel and Liam Gallagher from Oasis. And
Nice.
yes, and and mostly because A, they're sort of entertaining people, and B, they can't stand each other. So I'm like, oh, they should have to work together. But I got really excited and started texting my friends all the stupid jokes I could come up with, not the least of which being that like the first Oasis album is called Definitely Maybe. So I'm like, well, the first book is going to be called Deadly Maybe. And the first album, they're all sitting around like a living room and Liam is laying down on the floor. So I'm like, well, that's the dead body. And then they'll be behind them. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like all excited about it. So, yeah, but now I can work on this other DJ thing too. That'd be good. I'm going to look it up. Michael Shelley.
Where can people follow you online?
Oh, I am on Instagram and Twitter at Phillip Mottaz, PhillipMottaz. You can also find my website. Literally, if you Google murderous haircut Phillip, I'm the only Phillip out there writing about murderous haircuts that psychic barbers have to solve. But yeah, there you can find links about those books and any other upcoming ones. And I have a couple freebies out there for people to check out and leave reviews about and all that stuff.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful, wonderful way to spend a Monday night.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I was glad to do it.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.